Hey, welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you're returning. We do different things here: true crime, current stories, serial killers. This is the serial killer series. A couple of years ago, I did John Wayne Gacy. More recently, Eileen Wuornos and Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. But today, we are going to delve into somebody who's not really a serial killer at all, even though he has been labeled as that. I remember looking into him when I was little. I think my mother had the Helter Skelter book, and I can vaguely remember seeing him on TV, and he had a shaved head, and it was just really weird. But I also remember thinking if I was older, if I was a teenager, I would have wanted to go live with him. That's such a weird thing to admit, and now you know way too much about me. I have no idea why that was, but I kind of became obsessed. And not in a way like I admired him, but just, I don't know, it was like a strange fascination. Do not judge me. You don't know me. So what we do, or what I do, is I really like to deep dive into these killers to see what made them tick. Were they born like this? Were they just bad from birth? Were they made this way? Did something happen to them? And in the cases of Eileen and Richard, we found out that a lot of things did happen. And the same with John Wayne Gacy. And you'll find that in most serial killers, not all of them. In Charlie's case, I had always heard that he was born to this drug-addicted prostitute. And I thought, God, that's a horrible way to start your life. But in reading more, I found out that wasn't even true. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't reasons that Charlie ended up being who he was. So we're going to dive in. I do have notes because I like to keep notes and keep everything organized, so I may now and again refer to them, especially for specific quotes. So we're going to get started. The first quote that I'm going to read is straight from Charlie out of one of the books that was written. Mom was searching for her own identity and acceptance from others. In her search, she may have fallen in love too easily and too often. But a whore at that time? No. She may have sold her body later in life because of hard times, but I'm not about to knock her. Knowing the things I know now, I kind of wish she was smart enough to start out as a prostitute. And you can sit back and say a statement like that is exactly what I would expect from Manson. But to me, a class whore is about as honest a person as there is on this earth. She has a commodity that's hers alone. She sets the price, and if the price is acceptable, then the customer is happy, and the girl pays her rent and gets her groceries, and some young teenager down the street isn't raped by a stiff dick with no conscience. End quote. Sounds like something Charlie might say, right? So let's talk about his actual childhood. He was born to Ada Kathleen Maddox, and she was born in 1918. She goes by Kathleen, and she was the youngest of 5 children. Her dad was a railroad conductor, and her mom was a very strict, very religious woman. Her mother meant well. She thought that she was doing the best that she could for her children. She wanted to instill values in them. She wanted them to be brought up religious and to follow the rules. But Kathleen kind of had a little bit of a wild streak inside of her that longed for freedom, and her brother Luther was much the same way. Some of the rules in the house for the girls were you had to always be covered, and there was no dancing and no cutting your hair. Kathleen did not like any of those rules. They didn't mind the praying and the sermons and all of that, but to be told not to dance and not to fit in with the fashion that was going on at the time was just not something that Kathleen was willing to do. So her and her brother, her older brother Luther, would sneak out at night, and they would go find these places where dancing was allowed, and they really loved to do it. One of the places that they went to was Ritzy Ray's Rainbow Room. Say that 4 times fast. So they would go there and they would enjoy themselves, and then they would sneak back home. But Kathleen met a guy there Now, she was only 15 years old at the time, and she meets this guy named Colonel Scott. That's how he introduced himself, and he implied that he was in the military, which he was not. But she believed that he was, and he was wooing her, and they would dance, and they would talk, and she felt like he understood her, and she quickly fell in love with him. She ended up having sex with him, and she ended up pregnant. Now, when all of this happened, Colonel Scott told her that he had military duty that he needed to attend to. So he had to leave for a few months, but he would be back to take care of her and the baby. That was a lie. And when she realized that he was not coming back, she was crushed. She really was, even though she was a young girl, she was in love. So she moved to Cincinnati before Charlie was born. And when he was born, she did, in fact, name him No Name Maddox. So he had no name on his birth certificate. She claims that it was because she had put her mother through so much that she wanted to give her mother a say in what her baby's name would be. So she waited, and they ended up naming him Charles Miles Maddox. But that name didn't stay for long either, because soon she met a man, William Eugene Manson. She met him in 1934, and she changed Charlie's name to his new stepdad. She barely knew this guy, but she changed the name, and he became Charles Manson. So they were only married for a very short period of time. She thought, she has a husband, he's going to provide, he's going to let her still go out dancing and do these other things. And I guess, allegedly, she was not holding up her end of the bargain. On the divorce papers, it said, she refused to cook any meals. She refused to do any housework. She refused to perform her marital duties during the fall of 1934. She's guilty of extreme cruelty. She would berate and nag her husband over his lack of earnings, lack of money for dances, lack of a home of her own, and she utters these things in the presence of others to humiliate him. So the divorce was granted in 1935. Now, Kathleen managed for many years to stay out of the spotlight. She's Charles Manson's mother, so I'm sure the media was trying to get her to talk all the time, but she wouldn't. She did finally in 1971. And when she did at that time, she was 53 years old, and she had a 9-year-old daughter. Now, I never knew that Charlie had a little sister out there in the world anywhere. But Kathleen had remarried. She had a new family. This is many years later in 1971, so I'm going to read some statements from her as well to give you her version of what she felt like their life was like when Charlie was a little boy. Quote, "They would pick me to pieces, and I could take that, but this is for my little girl's sake. She doesn't know any of this, and I've hoped to keep it quiet until she's older. Just give me another 3 years. If I can have another 3 years, then it'll be blown over a little, and she'll be 12, more able to understand. Then my husband and I will tell her. My mother was a very strict woman, very religious, so when my sister and I got a few years on us, I guess you could say we had a tendency to be a little bit wild. But I didn't go around with men like that. When Charles came along, that had only happened twice in my life, and I was really in love with Colonel Scott. He was a lot older than me, 24, and he loved me too. All that stuff that you hear about Charles not knowing his father is not so. Scott used to come pick up Charles and take him home for the weekends with his own child. He just loved him." End quote. Now, I don't know if Kathleen was trying to save face, because I don't really believe that Colonel Scott would come pick up Charlie and take him to his house with his other children, because Colonel Scott was married to a woman named Dorothy, who kept the accounting for the household. And there was no orders of child support. There was never anything at all mentioning Charlie as a child. There's no record of it. So As we get into what went on in Charlie's life as a kid, you'll see also why I question whether or not Colonel Scott was ever involved at all. This is a quote from Charlie. One of Mom's relatives delighted in telling me a story about how my mom sold me for a pitcher of beer. They were at a bar, and there was a waitress without a child, and she jokingly told my mom she'd buy me from her. My mom replied, "A pitcher of beer and he's yours." The waitress set up the beer, and Mom stuck around long enough to finish it off and then left the place without me. Several days later, my uncle had to search the town for the waitress and take me home. End quote. Is that true? Is it just a story that they made up? Maybe to make Charlie laugh or to make him feel bad? I don't know. But the next thing that they talk about is when Charlie was 6 years old. Kathleen and her brother Luther, her partner in crime, got arrested for a robbery, and she was sentenced to 2 years in jail. So she went and dropped Charlie off at her parents' house, and he thought it was just going to be for a couple of days. Here's what he has to say. Quote, "When I was 6, my mom dropped me off with my grandparents for what was supposed to be a day or two. Several days later, my grandfather asked me to go for a walk with him. We walked and we raced, and he let me outrun him. He put me on his shoulders, and I pretended to be a giant. When we sat down to rest, he was fighting back tears, and he told me, 'Your mom won't be coming home for a long time.' I don't know if the lump in my throat was because my grandfather was crying or because I was realizing what he was telling me. I was now living in the same home that my mom had run from. Strict discipline, grace before meals, prayer sessions, don't fight, don't steal, and always turn the other cheek. So much so I believed in what my grandmother had to say, to the point where I became the sissy of the neighborhood. Soon, I went to live with my mom's sister, Joanna, and her husband, Bill. My Uncle Bill had a very specific way of how he wanted young men to act, and being a sissy was not the way. He would often say, 'Stop crying, act like a man, or I'm going to dress you like a girl.' I guess my behavior didn't change very much because the first day of school, Bill did dress me as a girl. I was teased so much, I went into a rage and started fighting everyone. I became the fightingest little bastard that school had ever saw." End quote. Is this another Charlie story, or is that true? I don't know, but that is something that he said. Charlie's mother gets released from prison, and he's ecstatic. He missed his mom. He's now 8 years old and very excited to be with her, but they did a ton of moving around. Kathleen, again, she was kind of a wild child. She wanted to go and live her life and, do all the things. That's what she wanted to do. And Charlie, because they were moving around so much, he was missing a lot of school. And he was becoming fresh. He's running around the streets. He's getting into trouble. His mother was busy. She's at the bar and she's leaving him with maybe unsavory characters. And she had a lot of men around, and she would refer to them as Charlie's uncles. He knew that they weren't his uncles, and they never stuck around too long until it came to this one guy. Charlie was around 11 years old, and this one guy stuck around a lot longer than the others. Charlie claims that he heard them having a conversation. The man wanted to go and travel and do things with Kathleen, but he said he didn't want to bring her sneaky son. He was not fond of Charlie at all. And Kathleen's response was, "Just wait. I will work it all out." Not long after that, she took Charlie to the courts, and she told them she did not have the means to take care of him, that she needed the court to make him a ward so that they could help him while she got her life in order. And the court took him and said, when you are stable, they would have another court hearing. So Charlie ended up in the Gibraltar Home for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana. and he didn't really know what was happening at first. He gets there, and I mean, he's 11, he's now 12 by this point, so he wasn't sure what the heck was happening, and he got to the dorms and he had a complete panic attack. Chest hurt, anxiety, he couldn't breathe, he started crying, he was asking for his mom, and he was lonely. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know who these people were. So he had to stay. And Charlie was a bedwetter. So this got him in a lot of trouble. Every time he wet the bed, he would get whooped with either a paddle or a leather strap. So that made him a target. At this point in his life, he's 12 years old. He weighs 65 pounds and he's under 5 feet tall. He was very, very small. So he was a target for the administration, the staff, because he was a bedwetter and he wanted to go home. Plus, there were much bigger and older kids there. He witnessed and was the victim of a lot of bullying as well as sexual assaults. This led me down the path of researching these schools, and one of them that we're going to talk about really had some serious issues. But in any case, his mom would come visit, but the story was always the same. I'm going to be on my feet soon. I'm going to take you home. I'm going to be on my feet soon. We're going to be okay. You're going to come home. Charlie got sick of hearing that because he heard it a lot. And she would say, we're going to have money, you're going to have a place to live, things are going to be okay. He got sick of waiting. He would get excited and then be let down every single time. So he decided to run away. He ran all the way home to his mom. He ran straight home to his mom. Can you imagine your kid is in a child's home and he runs away and comes home to you? What would you do? She drove him back the next morning, and he was devastated. He was furious. He became a little harder after that, and he continued to run away. He was a master at running away. When you see how many times this kid ran away from boys' homes, you're going to be amazed. Like, I don't know, he's Houdini or something. So he would run away from this boys' home. He would go out. He was stealing. He was sleeping under bridges. He was doing these little chores for people, like sweeping in front of stores, just to get money to have food. Because, I mean, he's a 12-year-old, 60-pound kid out there. He had to eat. But soon the police caught on and they realized he was a runaway and they had to bring him to court. Well, his mother shows up for court, and instead of taking him back home or giving him to his grandparents or his aunts and uncle, she sends him to another boys' home. So now he's going to Father Flanagan's Boys Town. Have you heard about Boys Town? Okay. 4 days in, and he runs away. Him and another kid steal a car, and they're just like, we are out of here. You know, we're going to go to the other teenager's uncle, who was also a criminal, by the way. What he would do is set the boys up with these crimes to go commit, burglaries and stuff. He would tell them where to go, what to get, and all of that. Of course, he was the adult. He took a big cut of it while the kids were taking all the risk. So he would do that. And of course, the kids end up getting caught because they're little kids. So Charlie is now sent to the Indianapolis City Juvenile Home. He was there less than a day. Why? Because he ran yet again. But he didn't know where he was going to go. I mean, this kid's escaping and running. How do you know at 12 where your next meal's going to come from? And you know, if you go to your mom, she's just going to send you back. So, of course, he's picked up yet again, and he's sent to the Indiana Boys School at Plainville. Within the first 30 minutes, Charlie's very observant by this point. He's watching them. He knows, you know, if they're locking doors. He knows if there are, like, fences that he can't get out of. And he sees that they don't lock the front door. He's gone. He runs. He didn't even get off the school grounds. But this place was a little bit different. He gets back inside, and it's now evening time. and the supervisor comes in. His name is A.B. Clark. He comes in with 3 other boys. This is according to Charlie. And they hold him down, and they take off his pants and his underwear, and the man beats him with a leather strap. Now, Charlie, thinking he's got to be a little bit tougher, tries to grit his teeth and not cry. But one of the boys whispers, "He won't stop until you cry." That's what gets him off. So Charlie lets out a scream, and the guy lets him go. During that first week, he was sexually assaulted by another boy. Charlie claimed that each day there was worse than the day before. There were tons of issues there. One of the issues is that teenage sexual predators who were molesting younger people were sent to this place. And they are now 18, 17, 16-year-olds with 11, 12, 13-year-olds where they can fully take advantage. The staff, some of them were very bad people, and they were not preventing this. They were allowing a lot of it to happen. If you were one of the guards' snitches, you were allowed to kind of do what you wanted to do. And this would happen. And some of the stories I read, I didn't even include in here. I can tell you just a small part of one. Once Charlie was on, I think it was dairy duty out on the farm, and he was sexually assaulted, and one of the guards picked up this pile of nicotine spit. I don't know if you use the spit and you spit it out and it's nicotine stuff, and he put it on his bottom to make it burn. I cannot, okay? So I really wanted to dig into this school to see what was going on. And I found a website called prisonlegalnews.org. And they did a publication on this Plainfield school. And this was in 2005. And I'm just going to read you 2 of the disturbing incident reports. 12-year-old boys with significantly older youth. An incident report dated February 8th, 2004 describes an incident in which a 16-year-old gave a 12-year-old articles of clothing as enticement to perform sexual acts. The 16-year-old took him into the unit day room in order to do this. Another report, dated July 31st, 2003, describes 2 separate incidents. An 18-year-old attempted to force a 12-year-old to perform sexual acts on the older youth in the bathroom area. It is not appropriate for 12-year-old boys to be housed with older, more sophisticated juveniles, nor is it appropriate for these older youths to have such apparently easy access to these younger residents. Moreover, for both the victim and the aggressors, these experiences are likely to inhibit whatever rehabilitative efforts that have been made in the past or that will occur in the future. Now I'm going to put the link in the description if you guys want to read the whole report, but it was very disturbing. So Charlie was able to escape at age 16, and I can't blame him at this point. I am a rule follower, but at this point in my research, I'm just thinking, run, Charlie, run. Don't go back to any of these homes. Just run. Run as fast as you can. Get a car and get out of there. They did steal a car. They headed to California, but only got as far as Utah before they got arrested. And this time, they were sent to a federal place, the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. And here, Charlie's 16 now. He's already been institutionalized about 4.5 years. The rules here were different. The way that you were allowed to move around and talk with other people was very different. So he was trying to listen to the guys who were older, who had more experience in these places, and learn from them. While he was in there, he was diagnosed by a psychiatrist to have homosexual tendencies. Quote by Charlie, "So I was supposed to be some kind of freak. But hey, I just went for sex the only way it had ever been taught to me. I didn't have any respect for a joint punk then, and I don't now. Most of the sex was consensual. I did lose a possible parole date once because I got involved with a punk. I was accused of holding a razor blade to his throat while we were having sex. Truth was, he wanted it, and I didn't mind giving it. I said if we got caught, he could just say I forced him. Well, we got caught, and he said I forced him. I was then listed as a homosexual with assaultive tendencies. Charlie ended up in a few more places, and one of them was the Federal Reformatory at Chillicothe, Ohio, where he met Frank Costello. Frank was a gangster, so Charlie really attached himself to him, followed him around, tried to learn from him. Frank would talk to the guards in a certain way. You know, he would talk to the staff as if he was the boss of them, and Charlie was impressed by this. He was impressed by people who held power over other people. And, you know, at this point, he has become institutionalized. This is what he knows. So he's trying to learn from these guys. And he learned as much as he could from Frank. And in 1954, he was released. He was now 19 years old. And he was released to his aunt and uncle in May of 1954. He feels like, you know, wow, I'm free. I'm an adult now. I'm going to try to do the right thing, whatever that looks like. And all he knew was, you know, I got to get a job and try and find a girlfriend. But he was very awkward. He hadn't talked to girls. He was 12 years old when he went into the system, and it was all boys. All he had were male-on-male sexual experiences. He was really awkward when it came to girls. He tried, but they thought he was weird until he met this one girl. They talked, and she seemed to understand him, and she liked him, and she laughed at his jokes, and she didn't find him to be a weirdo. And when they had sex for the first time, she told him she loved him. Now, being in there for 7 years, maybe he heard that from his mom a few times, but I'm going to guess that he wasn't hearing I love you very much. So he was infatuated. He said it made him feel better than anything he had felt in his life. So he married her. She was pregnant as well, but he was really excited. So now he had a job, and he had a wife, and he was going to have a baby. So he thought, you know, I can do this. Keep in mind, Charlie was used to fast money and not going by the law. So waiting for your wages, and then they're not very much, is not the same as, you know, trying to steal a car and pawn it off, or stealing jewelry, or a stereo, or a TV. It's not quick, and you have to work for it. So even though he now had a better outlook on life, he found him and his wife struggling to meet ends meet. They weren't meeting, and it was difficult. And he was never taught how to handle real life struggles. So he started looking for ways to get fast money. And while his wife was sweet, she also had a little streak in her too. So she knew what he was doing, but she wasn't participating, but she knew. And, you know, she didn't tell him to stop, so he kept going. And he made a very big mistake. He stole a car from a gangster, and now there were 2 of them after him. So he stole a different car, comes home and tells his wife, we're going to go to California. We're going to go to LA. They pack up everything they own, and they leave. And at this time, Charlie's mother was living in LA, and his wife was becoming bigger by the day. So he's got this car now, and he has it for a couple of months. So he feels like he owns the car, you know. He's driving it around, and it was reported stolen. So he eventually gets caught. But he goes to the judge and says, you know, I'm trying to do the right thing here. My wife's pregnant. Please, you know, don't put me in jail. And they didn't. They gave him probation, right? You would think that that's a good thing, except it's not, because he had a warrant somewhere else. So now he's thinking, shit, if I go back to court, they're going to put me over there. I'm going to miss the birth of my kid. all of this stuff. So again, Charlie and his decisions, they end up going back to Indiana, where Charlie gets in trouble again. His wife goes back to LA. They take him back to LA as well because that's where he was on probation. So now they're back there. She's living with Charlie's mom, and Charlie ends up in the federal penitentiary at Terminal Island, San Pedro. What are we going to do with you, Charlie? Now he's back in jail. And in this place, if you did good time, you might get out early. So he was committed, allegedly. He's going to do the good time. He's going to follow the rules. He's going to do everything that he can do to get out to his wife and soon-to-be-born baby. One thing after the next with this guy. His wife is writing him letters every day. A letter would come in. And he really, really loved her. So he's happy. He's thinking, soon I'll be out. I'm going to see my baby. Everything's going to be great. No. His mother comes up with a letter and says the wife met somebody new, some truck driver. Charlie freaks out. He's trying to win her back. He's saying all the things he thinks he's supposed to say. He doesn't want to lose her. He's hoping, I'm going to get out of here. I want to be with my wife and my baby. The next letter is that she moved out. She left Charlie's mother's house. She left with the trucker and with Charlie's son. He never set eyes on either one of them again. Editing me here, I didn't want to skip over this because it was important. The woman that Charlie married was Rosalie Willis. So she ended up going on to, she had Charlie's baby, Charles Manson Jr., and then she had a couple of other children. Charlie Jr. ended up changing his name to match that of his stepdad. It was Jay White he ended up changing his name to. So he was trying his hardest to get away from the legacy of Charles Manson. A really sad thing is that all three of the children that Rosalie ended up having, Charles Manson's ex-wife, died. One from an overdose. I'm not sure on another one. But Charlie Manson's son ended up committing suicide June 29th, 1993. The motivation was never really clear, but people say that it was because he was so distressed and always trying to distance himself from who his father was. He just was haunted by being part of Charles Manson. So he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head on exit 438 Interstate 70 in Burlington, Colorado. I didn't want to skip over that part, so forgive the editing me, and now back to what we were talking about. He was devastated, crushed, but he resigned himself to the fact that he was just a loser. He was never going to have good things. And, that's an easy way out, right? You're thinking, oh, poor Charlie, because you know how the story all ends. But think about this. He's 19. He's been in there since he's 12. He loses his mom. He finds this woman who loves him. He makes all these idiotic decisions. And now she's gone. And he never gets to see her again. He resigned to the fact that he was who they say he was. And that's how he started down the path of becoming Charlie Manson. The next part of this is the next little phase in his life. That'll be the next part that I put out. I hope you enjoyed this part and hearing about Charlie's childhood. I thought it was very interesting to know how he was living then, little wild child, I guess. But it is foreshadow of things to come in Charlie's life. And we'll talk about that on the next one.